Hi everyone, this is for Project 5, and it's the walkthrough on how to do Project 5. If you guys remember from last week, Project 4 was basically, one of the things I had you do was create a level in there, right? And when you did that, you might have noticed that when you went from one level to the other, it didn't save the data, right? So I'll just give you an example, right? So I have 0, and I'm going to collect my things, and I have this as a portal that takes me to the next level. I click on it and you see I now have 0, right? I was up to 3 and now I'm back to 0. So, and that's because it doesn't save data between one level and another. It wipes the data out. So what we need to do is figure out how to keep that data saved throughout the entire game, right? From the start of the game to the end of the game. And what we're going to do is use what they have called, the main thing is we're going to do is do an instance. And we're going to save data and do it as an instance. So to do that, we need to make some preparation for it. So the first thing we're going to do is create a struct. So what a struct is, or a structure, well, first we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder, and we're going to call this save data. This is just because I have a lot of stuff in here, and it just, for organization purposes, I'm going to create a folder. And now in here, I'm going to create a structure. And to get to the structure, we just right click and we go into our search and we type in struct. You'll see that we have a blueprint structure. And what a structure is, it's a user defined data type. And like, right, a data type's like an integer or a float or string. You know, there's lots of different data types. And so this is just a different type of data type. And like, right, whereas like a string or an integer stores one data set, what a struct does is lets you combine a bunch, kind of group them all together and have a bunch together in one container, in one thing, that so we don't have to keep adding all the different things we want to add. We just have the one we want to add. So we're going to call this one S player data. And before I get too far, I'm going to go to Tools, Debug, Widget Reflector, and I'm just going to make this bigger. 25, that seems good. Just makes it a little easier to read the screen. So right, so I have my S player, and so what I'm just going to do is double click it, and we're going to come in here, and you'll see it automatically gives us one variable in it. And we're going to just rename this to collected. And it's not a Boolean, right? The data type for this one is an integer, right? Like, I have one variable that I have for collecting all the stars, and I have it called something with collected. And so now we're going to add another variable, and we're going to call this one transform. Now what transform is, right, because it would be kind of nice, not only do we want to keep how many items we've collected, we want to keep where the player is at in the game, right? Like what location they're currently at. We want to keep that information. If we had like health, we could store that. If we wanted to, we could also add a variable for, like, you know, the star one, right? Like, we have all those stars, so we can save all the stars too. So what we're going to be doing is saving the transform, and it's actually a data type. And what that is it's basically the location of the actor or the blueprint that we made, right? So like the third person or whatever, in this case it's the third person character, right? It's their rotation, their scale, and their location, right? The XYZ. And right, so if we wanted to, if we're going to keep the things for the star too, for the purposes of this, we're really only going to be doing these two. But just so you can see, you could have lots of different variables added into your structure. And it just means that I can pass that data around with only having to call the one item. I don't have to call all the individual items. I just call the S player data, and it sends all of that data, right? So that's that. And now we're going to use that, and what we're going to do is we're going to create another class. So we're back into our content drawer, and we're going to now add what's a class called a save game class. And this is a built-in Blueprint class that is in Unreal. So we're going to go to Blueprint class, and we're going to go under all class, and we're going to just look for save game. And you'll see it comes up, and you could read this, right? It's basically we're creating a special class designed to store and load player data or game data, right? So we're going to create this, and we're just going to use our normal BP, and we're going to call this save game. And we're going to open it up, and what we need to do in this is we're going to add the player data that we created the structure for, right? So this is where this class is going to be the data that we're saving, and we're going to keep it with us, right? So we just pull this up to get the data that we want to have available. So this is going to be our struct. So we're going to call it player data, and the data type is going to be our S player data. So we can compile, save selected, just always making sure that we are doing good. So now all we've done right is create our struct, and then create this class, the save game class, which basically is just going to be the place where we have the data to store and retrieve. And now we're going to make an interface. Now what this interface is, it's basically the same thing as the struct, that we're getting a place where we can combine a bunch of data together and only have to call one thing as opposed to having to call multiple things. And so what this one is going to be is an interface. So you're going to right click, and it's going to be in this create advanced assets, we're going to see blueprint, right? So under here with create advanced asset, blueprint, and then there's a blueprint interface. And we're just going to call this BP interface. So what this is what we're going to use for this is we're going to add a bunch of functions to it. So we're going to double click it, and you'll see, so basically like the struct, we had variables, the interface has functions. So we're going to add a bunch of functions that we're going to need for the for us to be able to save data and load data and get data, that's what we're going to do. So it's going to be load game data, and add a function save game data, and add another function get game data, and then add an additional one save player. And so you can just see that these are all of our things. If you click on any one of them, you can see that there's some information that you can get about them, right? You'll see that they have inputs and outputs, right? Because what a function is, if you remember, is just like a place to hold logic that you're going to process, right? So you might have stuff that you're inputting into it. You're going to then process that data, and then you're going to have some output. So you're either going to do something in that function, or you're going to output something to that function. So most of these, right, what we're going to do is we're going to go and, like the load data, we're going to go get the data, like we don't have to pass it in, but we're going to go like open a data file, pull out the data, and then load the data. And then the save data file, right, we're going to do the similar thing. We're going to go get a data file and put data into it. The get game data that's when we're actually going to retrieve the data. So that one actually needs an output. So what we're going to do is come down here to the outputs. We're going to click on game data, get game data, and then click on outputs, and we're going to add a new output. And we're going to have this one be save game data. And its data type is going to be the BP save game. So we're going to compile and save. And now we're going to create a instance. So now what an instance is what a game instance is basically where the data is, like, and it's probably better with a picture. This is the game flow chart from Unreal that talks about like how the data is loaded and how it's saved and what happens during different parts of it. So basically, right, when we start our engines, right, start the Unreal Engine, it gets up and running, you get the initiator or whatever, you load the game, right, and then you hit the play in the editor button. Or if you create a standalone, you could go look it over here. But the orange side is what we've been doing so far. And so what you're going to do is, right, you press the play in the editor, and what it does is it creates a game instance. And so basically, a game instance is just saying that it's a level that, or a blueprint that persists through different levels. So basically, from the start, from the time you initiate this, right? So we create this UGame instance, and it lasts all the way until the game ends, until you exit it out. So it's exists all the way through it, and so it doesn't go away. So that's why it makes it perfect for us to be able to store data into it and have it be where we do our processing and save and retrieve data, because then we'll be able to use it throughout the entire game. So we'll go back to here, and we don't need interface anymore. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a game instance. And so this one, you're going to right click and blueprint class. And in all classes, you're going to click on game. You're going to search for game instance. So you'll see, right, if there's one for platform, but we're doing game instance. And so we're just going to select that and create a new game instance. And we're going to call it BP game instance. Now, for this to actually load when we load our game, we need to edit the configuration for our game or for our project to tell it to go load this instance. So we're going to go up to Edit, go to Project Settings, and you're going to click on Maps and Modes, right? So this is where we changed, like, we could change what startup map we have, right? Right now I have third person on this game. We probably want it to be one of the different ones, but we'll leave it as third person for right now. So what we're going to do is in here search for instance, and you'll see that it has the BP game instance. It probably should have started with this. Yours will probably have game instance class saying game instance. What we want it to be is the one we just created, which is BP game instance. And so there's no save. We just click out of it and exit it. And so now when, like, if I go back to the picture, right now when we hit play, it's going to load this game instance that we're creating right now. And so in this one, what we're going to do, the first thing we're going to need to do is add a couple variables. So you can see, am I in the right one? We're in BP game save. We're going to exit out of that because we don't need that up right now. What we need is the instance class that we just built, which was this one. So we're going to double click game instance. So we're going to make sure we're in BP game instance. And we're going to save this. And what we want to do here is now we want to create a couple variables. We need 2 variables to start this off with. And so we're going to create a variable over here on the left-hand side under my blueprint. And the first one we're going to call it is save data. And this is going to be of data type BP save data, right? That was the class that we made that has the structure that we made that has the information, right? So that's so that the data can live throughout the entire game, and it's not just when one level is open, but it lives, it exists through the entire game level. And then the other thing we need to do, we also need another variable, and this one we're going to need it's going to be a slot name. Now what a slot is basically we are going, and it's going to be a string, and so we're going to hit save so we get the default to pop up, and we're going to just call it slot1. Now what this is saying that like right when we have the ability that if we wanted to we can make multiple slots, like right, if you remember like the old video games, like you had the number 1 slot like for the highest score player, and then you had the number 2 slot, number 3 slot, right? So you could save multiple things. For us purposes, we really are only going to have this one, but we'll have it listed here. So we're going to compile, make sure that it all works. So there we have our 2 variables, and now we need to get down to the nitty-gritty of actually we need to add the interface to this. So right, we have those 4 functions that we built in the interface, and now we want to add that interface into here. So what we're going to do is click on class settings at the top, right? And this gives us information about this specific class that we created, this game instance class. And on the bottom right hand side, on the details pane, you'll see it says implemented interfaces, and we're going to add an interface, the one we just made, which is BP interfaces, right? So we're going to add that, and you'll notice on the left hand side when I hit that, it kind of went away and doesn't look like we have anything, but on the left hand side there's an interfaces. It might be closed for you, but it should have popped open, and then you can see the 4 functions that we built, right? And so with these 4 functions, we want to define them and actually give them some data so that they'll do stuff for us. So we'll start with get game data, because this one's the easy one. It just basically returns the save game data, and so fingers crossed we should just be able to click this, and look at that, it worked, and we compile and save, and that should be it for get game data. So basically we're just loading the save game data into the spot, and then we're going to click on the load game data. Now we're getting into the fun parts, and we're going to actually load data onto our like see if the file exists out there with the save data, and if it does, it's going to retrieve the data. And so what we're going to do is we have event game, load game data, and we need to check to see if that data exists. And it's literally that easy. Does the save game exist? That's the blueprint we're going to add, which is does save game exist? And right, so now you see why we had that slot. We called it slot name over here because there's a spot. We could have just typed it in here, right? Slot 1, but having it as a variable is kind of nice because then we can update that and change it and it's not hard coded. Hard coding things is always a little not the best practice. You usually want to use a variable for things just because then you could have logic that goes along with that. So right, so I'm just dragging the name from slot name into it. So that's the name we've saved. And so it's checking to see, does this save game exist? Is it out there? Is there a file out there called this? And I'll show you in a little bit where this file should live for you. And then we're going to go over this. Does save game exist? Is going to give us, right, you see how it has a return here on the right hand side? Like the left hand side is where we get data in, the right hand side is where we data comes out of it. It's a function, and it's going to have a return value here, and it's a Boolean. It's either going to be true or false. Either the game data exists or the game data doesn't. So, right, so that leaves us into a branch, right? Let's say branch. That gives us the true false. Because we're going to, if the game data doesn't exist, it isn't there, then we just want to create the data, right? So we're going to say it didn't exist, so we're just going to create the data. And simple as that, create save game. And so you'll see this, right? And what we want to do is, this is the BP save game, right? That's the object that we made that has the structure, that has the data, the collect and the transform, right? So that's what we're creating. We're going to save that information off into a file on our computer. So that way we could load it up and when we play again. And then we want to have this just be save data here. We're distracted out so that we set the save data. And I always like to compile multiple times while I'm going through things. It always just makes things, you know, little warm fuzzies. And so that was just if the slot, what we called it, slot 1, does not exist, then it's going to just create it. So if it does exist, then what we want to do, right, is actually get the data out of it. So we're going to, for the true, we want to load game from slot. Now you'll notice here, and it was on the create one as well, that there's two versions here. There's load game from slot and there's async load game from slot. Now this is synchronous and this is asynchronous. What that means is synchronous means that things have to happen one at a time, right? So you'll do one thing, you wait till it finishes, then you do the next thing. Asynchronous means that you could have it be doing at the same time. Now there is a way that we could do and have logic that checks to see if, because like, right, if this would help speed things up, like if you would display one thing, but you could be loading data on the other one. For our purposes, we don't need that. We have very little data we're saving. It's not going to take a long time to save the data, like, because what happens if you do it with the load game with the synchronous and without the what might happen is the game might freeze while it's loading data, but we don't have a lot of data to load, so it's okay for us. So that's why we're just using the synchronous. So we actually, right, because it's true, we're actually loading it. We need the same information we did before, right? We still need the slot name to make sure that we got it from the right slot. And now we're going to need to cast this to the BP saved, right? Saved game. So why we're needing to cast it is because right here we have BP saved, but we don't have the player data, right? So what we're going to do is cast this BP save game. And this will basically it just allows us to actually save the data. And we're going to need to make sure that what we're loading goes into the save data, right? Because this is where we are actually putting the data, is in this class. And then we want to set the data, right? We want to set save data. I think if I just click and drag it over here, it'll do it for me. Oh, we don't want cast fail. That's why it didn't work. Let's try that again. So basically we branched, and what we can do, and what is I always suggest doing, is test your work. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to just add some print statements. So I'm just going to say print string, right? And what this will do is, like it says hello world, but this one is, I'm going to say, add some dashes, load true. And I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to do it over here for false. And I'm just going to sandwich it in here. And basically this just lets me check to see that I do get the data, right, to see if I'm getting here. And then we could add more later to make sure that it's actually going through each of the steps. But so this is the load data. This is basically the load. We go through and check to see if the file exists. If the file does not exist, then we just create the file. And then if it does exist, then we're going to go get the data and we're going to put it in BP save game, right? That's the class that lets us save the data throughout the entire system. Now we need to actually save the data. So we're going to do the save game data. And this one should be fairly easy. All we have to do is get the blueprint, save game to slot. That's it. And we just load it up with the variables that we have on the side here, right? We have our save game data and we have our slot name. And so we got those values to add into here. And we compile, make sure it works. And then one last function, which is save player. And with this one, what we want to do is save the player data, right? And so I'm actually missing an item on here. What we need is, so we need to go back into our BP interface. And with our save player, we actually want an input, which we don't have. So we're going to click over here on inputs, and we're going to pass it the player data. And this is the struct. So basically, right, this means that it's an input into this function that we need so that we can pass it data and it can be saved. So we'll go back into the interfaces and you'll see it automatically updated. So now we have player data in here, that this data is getting passed into here. What we need to do is basically update this save data. So what we're going to do is get the save data, and we're going to set player data. So you can see now we have the saved player and that, so we can connect them. And now we've gotten an updated version of the player data, where we're now going to go from this, from the set player data, we're going to get the blueprint save game data. So this is basically just updating the data. Now we have one more area that thing we need to add to the BP game instance, and that is we're going to look for event init. So what this is when the game is initialized. So I showed you guys the image right where we press play, and then it creates this game instance. So what we want to do is when we do this, when we hit play and it creates the game instance, we want it to call this function, right? And so that we could load the data. So this is where we want to load the data. And so that's what this is. And we're going to just do that. Load game data, right? That's the function I made. That's right here, right? Load game data. So this is just going to come down here and run this when you hit save. So we're going to make sure we compile and save. Now we need to actually use the functions and stuff that we've created for the load and the save and all of that. And we're going to do that using the third person character. So we're going to go open the third person character. And so a couple things we're going to need to do here, right? We need to be able to save the data, and we need to be able to load the data. So let's start off with, we're going to create a function in here called getPlayerSave. We're going to compile just so that we get information up. And we're going to need getting player save is going to return the this is the player data that we're trying to get here. Which is our S player data, right? So now you can see we're returning the player data type. Now what we could do is, there's a couple ways we could do this. We want to set this information, right? So what we could do is we could split the struct pin, and this splits it out into all of the parts that we made from our struct, if you can remember back that far, right? We made the structure that had the data collected, the transform, and the star. So now we can do this where we get the count collected. And then we also need to get the player data transform. And so this we're going to click from here and we're going to say get actor transform. And so this is basically going to give us the player's location. We're going to compile and save. So you can see what this is basically doing, right, is we have this get player save function, and it's taking our current collect count and our current actor's location, and it's returning that. So if you call this function, you're going to get the current collect count and you're going to get the current location of the user. So this is so that we could then go save it off. So we're going to need another function. So we're going to click over here to use the information, right? So use player save. And this one is going to need the input, right? So the get player save that outputted the player data. Now with the use player save, we're going to need to get the data in. So we're going to have an input of the player data, which is the S player data. So now we have that coming in, and so now what we want to do is set this values. So we'll compile. So now that I have my user player save, and I have created my input of player data, what I'm going to do is split that. So you're going to right click on it where it says player data and say split structures pin. This basically just gives us, like we did the last time, all of the parts to it. So this way, like this data is what's coming from the saved file, and we want to load our game with this data. So the first thing we're going to check on is here with the player data transform, and we're going to see if it equals. So you're just going to type in equal, and it should be under utility operators. And we're going to say if it equals, and we're going to say transform, maybe. Lots of transforms. What we want is, here we'll put it at the front, make transform. So you can see it basically gives us an all zeros location, which is kind of nice, right? So that just says if they're at the 0 spot. So now, right, this is a conditional statement, right? It's saying if this equals this, and then we have a return value. So it's going to be either true or false, right? So like before, we're going to branch. And so now we have our true or false. And if it is true, right, so this, we're going to connect these two. If it's true, we're not going to do anything. So we'll just do a print string. Location 0. But if it's false, right, then we want to load it. So then we want to get the blueprint set actor transform. And we want this value, right, from that we got in the function. We want this value to come in here to the new transition. So, right, so this is checking to see if it's 0. If it's 0, it's not going to do anything. If it's not, it's going to come over here and load the transform. And then after that, we also need to load the collect count. So we can just pull this out and say set collect count. And we want to set it to the value from this one. So I'll zoom out a little bit. So right, we're just connecting the data collected to the collect count. Now, it has a lot of like the lines and stuff through it. You can add markers to these just by double clicking if you want to make it less lines going through things or whatever. This is basically just for human readability. All right, so what we were doing again, we've created a function basically to say, oh, we want the data and we want to load it into the values, right? So it's getting the data collected and the transform data, and it's storing it in the collect count and the location. So we're going to hit compile, make sure we didn't mess anything up. And we'll also go file, save all, just so that we have everything saved. And now we need to go into our event graph, and we want to look for our event begin play. Now what this is, right, is what we do at the beginning. So you can see with mine, right, at the beginning we are showing the widget, the UI widget that I made, and it's adding that to the screen, right? So that's how I see the collect count up there. So what we want to do is just go to the end of this, and we are going to basically check to see if the data is valid. So, right, we want to actually load the data or use the data, right? So we're going to first get the get game instance. This is the instance that is going through that has the data that, so we can go from the start to the end and always have the same data, right? So we're getting that, and you notice it doesn't have any inputs, and that's because that is just available to us anytime we want. We could always just get this game instance. That's why we're doing it this way. And then what we're going to do is say it is valid. We want to check to make sure that the data is valid, that our game instance is valid. And we're going to get game data. Oh, this was too soon. Get game data. And then we're going to check to see if this is valid. So if it's valid, we're going to use player. We'll use player save, and we're gonna connect pieces. Hit save, right? So now, right, it should, at the beginning of the game, it should go and check and use the player data. And then the other thing we need to do is, right, so we could test this. And so you can see I have 0 things. We can go and collect some. And, you know, one of the things I always like to try to tell you guys is always put, or what I like to do is put print statements. And not just say hello, but also like put like what I did. So I'll put use player save complete. And right, I still haven't saved the data at all, so I need to figure that part out, right? So that's the next part I need to do. So this is just seeing if it loads it. It doesn't seem to be loading it, which is a little perplexing. So we're just gonna begin test. So you can see it did the begin test. So that meant it got here, and then it didn't seem to get to this point. So it's saying my data isn't valid, which is valid because I haven't saved anything yet. So kind of makes sense. So what we need to do is now we need to create our checkpoint. And I'm going to go put it in here. I'm just going to, like we've done this multiple times, right? We're just creating a blueprint actor. We're going to add a collision on it. So we're going to call it BP checkpoint. I'm going to edit it. I'm just going to make a cube and make it be able to go smaller. Because I just like the idea of like a little button that they stand on and it saves it. And so what we need now is the collision, right? Add collision. We'll still do a box, and we'll do the same thing. Make it a little wider so it fits. And with our box, we want to give it a nice mesh. On our cube. I like that one because it's a rainbow. And we're going to go back to the box, which is the collision, and we're going to do begin overlap. Right? And so this is when we begin overlap, we want to save it. So we're going to need to cast to third person character. And we want to get from that the get player save, right? That function that we just made. And we'll get another get game instance. Right, this is again because what we want to do is save the data to the file. So what we're going to do here is we get this the instance, right, that has that struct, and then we want to save it. So we're going to get the game instance, and we're going to save player. Oh, we just need to connect these. We have player data, and we have the first person target. There we go. And actor to the object. So we're all connected. So we're going to compile, and fingers crossed. That was nice. And then I think I go to our third person. I need to put my checkpoint out here, right? And I'm just going to make a couple, so I'll put another one over here. So now we're going to try it. So we have this one, and we don't have any indicators, right? So I might stop, and look, we did have an issue. Tempted to assign to none, huh? That means that, like, something didn't get initialized right. So we'll try to figure out what's going on and make sure that I've done everything I was supposed to do. So when you're in a position like this where you've left something out and you don't remember what you left out, we can come here and there's output log. I'm going to clear the log. So I start with a fresh log. And all of these print strings should also go there. And so then we're going to test it. We're going to come in and hit play. And we'll go and collect a couple coins. And then I'm going to run over that. And you notice it's not saying anything, right? And so we'll hit stop and we got a bunch of red errors. So I'm going to, we could kind of try to see what this is telling us. It's in the BP game instance. So if you click over here and it'll let you open it, then we can minimize this and we could try to figure out what I did wrong. And you'll notice I don't have any print strings. So that's what I'm going to add. Print string. And I like adding some dashes and stuff, so I could just put save player. Right? This is just so when I go and look in logs, it's a little easier to read. So I'll have another one over here. Print string. Successful save game. This is save player. And then this is save game. Sometimes I do like to mix things up. I could put asterisks instead of a dash. Save game. Right, I have this load one. So I have a load true and a load false. So when we looked at our logs, we could come up here and see, and now we can see where the error is. And you'll notice that it begin test, but it didn't ever do the it didn't do these, did it? I'm going to try that one more time. I'm going to right click and clear. So I start with nothing. Third person. I'm going to hit play. You can see here I got begin test. And I'm just going to stop at this point so I can go look and see where I'm at. So you can see here begin test. And this is why I like using dashes sometimes, because you can filter for dashes. So I can look at my output log and see. It doesn't seem to be going into that load at all, does it? So if we go and look, right, that is in game instance, event load game data. This should be called, did I go to project settings, maps and modes, instance, BP game instance.